Welcome back to the Recovering Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Charles Van Laux. Thanks for returning. Today we have a guest on the show, David Whitesock. He's the founder and CEO of Commonly Well. It's a very interesting platform that utilizes AI in a lot of interesting ways for our community. So welcome, David.
Thanks, Charles. Pleasure to have this conversation today. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to just start off by telling us a little bit about your platform and what makes it so unique?
Yeah, Commonly Well was kind of born out of solving the problem of bringing the idea of business intelligence to addiction, recovery, and behavioral health. So, businesses operate on information and they make decisions on information. Coca-Cola, the CEO of Coca-Cola, wakes up every day and looks at a spreadsheet or looks at a set of figures and numbers and says, well, we didn't do this yesterday. We better do this today. And healthcare doesn't really work like that. Yet we're dealing with some things that are way more important than cans of Coca-Cola, right? And so we've got a lot of data, we just don't know how to use it. And so we've been trying to solve that problem. And then in the middle of that, understanding that the people we work with aren't really data literate.
Mm.
And so trying to make that easy. Not everybody knows how to read a bar graph or a line chart. And so how do we make that simple, not just for the practitioners, whether they're coaches or peer support or clinicians, but also the clients, the members, the patients. They answer questions and we want to give them feedback, but how do we not scare them? How do we make that information usable and meaningful for their journey? So that's what we try to do. And then of course we're sprinkling in all the latest technologies and sophistications of what's ahead of us to still make it easier.
I love that. And, that's one thing that I remember meeting you at the symposium. And that's one thing that really stood out is the um, desire for something better, to utilize all of today's tools for our community. I love that approach. And I think that it's 100% needed, because the only way that I see this issue, especially in the first year, getting any better is to apply technology wherever we can.
Yeah, I've overcome addiction myself, and when I'm stuck, when I'm trying to solve a problem, I always go back to that first year of the last time I had to overcome addiction. But then I also think about the other years before that, the previous 12 years where I really struggled, and it was so hard. Recovery was so hard, and there's a million reasons why it was so hard. Systems didn't like it wasn't a system. There was a lot of stigma. There was a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of just, you haven't decided, David. So until you decide, we'll be here for you. And it's just a lot of that and a lot of me not being ready too. But there's so many things that could have worked better, but just didn't. And so I don't think the recovery process has to be as hard as we make it.
Mm.
Both the
I fully
system,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, both the system and then us ourselves. Like we make it really hard, both the ones that are working in the system and the people actually in the recovery process. We make it very hard. And so I think we can take a lot of the guesswork out. And I think we can make that process so much easier.
Yeah, I do as well. And, I remember personally, um, I just felt such a massive just step down in care, leaving treatment, and then having all of these things for myself, that I had to go and take care of. But I remember, I think that that's one thing personally that has really led me to the peer model and really just, I've seen some amazing success in some of my own clients in the peer model. And I feel like, utilizing that same approach and adding in technology, adding in, ways to find care. Even just that alone is a challenge, for a lot of people, the access to care, so difficult sometimes, and it's kind of an uphill battle for some people. Um,
Yeah, because addiction's a beast. Substance use disorder, it's a beast, and it for a lot of people that end up showing up in the moment where they need that care, they have eroded a lot of things. I mean, they've kind of been stripped down to bare. And So accessing care at that point, when you're coming up from underneath the waterfall, is so hard. Um, and we haven't built a system. Our system isn't built for somebody who's what I like to call a rising risk. We use the image of the iceberg, where we see all we see in the system is that top part above the water. But there are another 50 to 80 million people under the water. They're the rising risk folks. They're the ones that are, maybe the weekend drinkers, and they've been weekend drinking for about 3, 4 years. And now that's carrying over into the week because they got a stressful job or whatever it might be. And it's starting to become way more than just a dependency, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
starting to make some silly decisions, bad decisions. Addiction manifests. And that rising risk, that person, if we wanted to capture that person to get that person help now, they couldn't get help because you try to get them into a treatment facility and the treatment facility is like, I only got room for Medicaid patients. Well, I have insurance, but we only take
Mm.
Medicaid patients. Well, why don't you take me? We only take Medicaid patients. And now they got to go out of network, right? And so they're traveling 500, 1,000 miles away, and the family isn't understanding this. It's like, well, so what does the guy do? He just goes back to his regular life. The system isn't designed for
Yeah.
for those folks, and so they linger and languish for 2, 3, 4, 5 more years, lose a job, lose a family, now they're homeless. I mean, you know the story. And I just think if we made sort of peer support more attainable, more approachable, further upstream. Like it's not just I don't just do peer support after treatment. I can do peer support before treatment.
Mm-hmm. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I think if people knew
absolutely.
that and understood that, that would change a lot of the flow of people needing care.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think more of a proactive approach can be worthwhile because a lot of people. I mean, I remember myself even right. I could convince myself when I was sitting inside of a burning building that everything was fine because I wasn't currently on
That's right.
fire. I mean, the things we can convince ourselves of in active addiction is insane. So, more of a proactive kind of approach, like, oh hey, I noticed there's some smoke and a couple of flames. Maybe I should get out
Mm-hmm.
of here. Maybe I should find out how I can even find the exit. Maybe there's somebody who has gotten out of this building before who can help lead, right? That whole
Yep.
peer model. And I really do hope that comes on much earlier in the process as well, because I mean, it can still be very effective, but I think that earlier on, you know, we we don't have to go through all that
That's right.
pain on our own, right? Like I talk often about gaining that map,
Mm.
right? Like for me, for example, I gained that map in the rooms. So I would go to meetings and I would listen to these people's stories and I'd say, oh, okay, there's a landmine over there. Got it. Okay, I'm not going over there. Cool. Oh, he tried this. Didn't work at all. Got it. Okay. And I could kind of start to build my map so that I didn't have to personally go through all of that heartache and drama and everything, but I could still kind of gain the rewards from it, And I think that can also apply here with a peer. They can help to guide away from those landmines. They can help to show where the better road is, easier
Yeah,
road.
it's challenging because so much of this work, so much of how we get people to go from a place of sitting in the room, the burning room, but they're not yet on fire, is our stories. And I'll say something kind of controversial, but much of what we do in terms of those stories is it's basically just redemption porn. It's resilience porn. And
Hmm.
many people just like to throw those stories out there, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So one person tells a story, you've probably seen this in the rooms. One person tells a story
Mm-hmm.
and the next person comes up and it's worse. And the next one tries to
Right.
top that. And we do that over and over and over again. And I don't know, my experience always was I didn't understand what I was supposed to get from that. Was I supposed to get
Mm.
that, oh, I'm not bad enough yet?
Mm.
And I
Interesting.
psychologically,
Yeah.
what I've learned since is that's exactly what's happening. People are registering and going,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm not that guy. I've got a long way to
Yeah.
go before I reach that. So, see, I don't need these 12 steps. I don't need to go to the
Exactly.
counselor or a therapist. I'm out of here, Jim. And so that's tricky too. And so how do we change that narrative of, I love what you said, the hole doesn't have to be deep. It could just be a small little hole, but deep enough that I need a ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody
Right.
can just reach their hand down or throw the ladder down and say, no, I've been in that hole before. I'm going to come down in there and show you the way out. Again, it doesn't have to be a giant hole. It just, let's get you out now. Let's start sprouting this tree today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you talked about with, you know, the one
Mm,
uppers, the people in meetings who have to, tell a worse story and a worse story and all that. And, it reminded me of this young client that I had. Obviously, I won't give any detail, but I had this young client a while ago who essentially what felt at least pushed away from the rooms for that very
mm-hmm,
reason. You know, he felt that his substance wasn't strong enough, right, in terms of like severity to earn his place in the rooms or whatever, right? He felt that his stories weren't dark enough and this and that. And it's true. I think that any person going through any kind of heartache, right, any kind of substance, any kind of whatever, always should have a place to call home where they can find that support, they can find that care and that wisdom and hope. Matter of
Yeah,
fact, oh my
so
gosh, I
when
don't know.
when I start having the conversation like this, I always like to just bring up that we don't, if anybody's experienced themselves or in their family cancer, you never
Mm,
see any of this in the cancer world. It's never like, oh, you've only got stage one cancer. I've got stage four. I'm worse off
right.
than you. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
Cancer's cancer, and it's scary
Mm-hmm.
either way. And you show up to one of those support meetings, and it's like, you're here, I'm here. What do you need? What do you need right now? Are you
Yeah.
just scared? Are you frightened? You know it's going to come? What do you need? And we don't do that very well in our space. And I think it's
Mm,
just because it's long held traditions of the way things have done. But that stuff is starting to age out, and I'm kind of optimistic about that. I've sat in some
yeah.
other circles and some other places where the support rooms are much more, hey man, you're here for whatever reason you showed up today. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be over traumatized or over dramatized. It doesn't have to be any of that. But you're here today.
Yeah.
You don't feel like you should. Life isn't what you want. What do you want? How can I help? It's not more complicated than that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that's the reason why I'm so excited to see, new tools, and I'm excited to see, new support groups, new everything. I think that it's all growing a lot, and I think that it's becoming more socially acceptable, I suppose, less taboo to talk about these things and explore them and try and help one another and have a mental health day, even, right? Those kinds of things. And I think it's all kind of pointing towards a much brighter future for, our entire community, really. Um, and, you had mentioned something interesting in our pre show conversation about the math doesn't math. I wonder if you could touch on that for our viewers.
Yeah. So why does peer support even exist? Right. It exists because the addiction treatment system that was in place 20, 30 years ago wasn't big enough. It wasn't large enough to meet the need. And so what's the need? So if we just do the math, generally we say that there are 10% of the public who could walk into a treatment facility tomorrow and they could get a diagnosis. That number has actually gone up. And so the way that SAMHSA does this now is SAMHSA does a 2-year survey. Every 2 years, they ask the same questions of a population. And 2 years ago or 4 years ago, there were 22 million people that could walk in and get diagnosed with substance use disorder. This last time they did it, the number went up to 46 million. So the rate
Hmm.
of people
Wow.
with a substance use disorder is much higher. But let's just use the 10% number and let's just pick a community like Denver, Colorado. Denver's got what? 2 million in the MSA, 2.5 million for ease. We'll just call it 2 million. So that means that 10% of 2 million is 200,000 people walking around Denver, Colorado right now with mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorder. Okay, so if we looked at Denver, Colorado, at all of the clinical and non clinical care available, could all 200,000 walk in the door and get a bed or a chair? No. What's the number? It's probably 10% of that. It's probably 20,000. There's probably
Mm.
20,000 beds. So there's 90% who need the care, can't get it because there's no chairs, there's no beds, there's no way or no service provider for it. Now, take onto that what I said earlier about the rising risk people. So if we just add that 30 or 40 more percent, now we're talking about not 200,000 people. We're talking about times what, four? We're talking about almost 600,000 people walking around Denver, Colorado right now who could use some support. And they're not getting it. They go to the doctor, they go to the primary care clinic, they think they've got health care. They're even open with their doc, and the doc says, go to a 12-step meeting. You're not that bad. You got diabetes, and we should focus on that. Cut down your drinking, cut down the food, go to a 12-step meeting, right? And that is still what passes. And so here's this person who wants care, needs care, can't get it. Healthcare won't do it, and there's no other place for them because they don't ring the bell. So that's why I say that the math doesn't math. Because again, if we had a magic button and we said everybody who needs it could get care, it would be impossible. So that's why I love peer support.
Mm.
Peer support picks up a little bit of that gap, and I think can do things faster than clinicians within
Yeah,
reason,
I
you
would
know.
agree.
And everybody needs a coach. So in life, or in your profession, or in whatever. So I think we can bridge that gap. We can kind of pull people out of the river before they get to the waterfall, and I think that's what peer support does really, really, really well.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. And I'm curious. I'd like to hear about your sort of personal connection through recovery to developing this tool, this commonly well tool.
Yeah. So I was a old radio guy in the late '90s and 2000s. That was my original profession. I love to see a lot of people in podcasting now because when I lost my radio gig in 2004, I'd also taught myself web design, and so I was one of about 30 people in the world trying to figure out podcasting. So much so that in 2005, the New York Times showed up to my parents' house where I was living in their basement. I was running a podcast network of 5 podcasts, and so the New York Times
Hmm.
interviewed me and a few others around the country. And so I was like on top of the world at that point, but I was deeply sick. Um, I had
Hmm.
4 DUIs up to that point, attempted suicide a few times. I had a career, but I lost it. Tried to reinvent myself. That failed. Ended up in a jail in South Dakota with one last ditch effort at a radio job, and had to completely reinvent my life in 2005, 2006. And in that process, I ended up in a sober home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And one of the guys one of the guy that started that sober home, kind of became a friend, became a mentor, and over the years, he was somebody who had overcome addiction himself. He was a serial entrepreneur. He looked around the community and said, "What resources do we need in Sioux Falls to help people?" Now, again, this is way before what we're doing today, right? And so he started sober homes. That was easy. You just buy a home and put some rules together, and some really great people and good people, and make sure that that can be done. And I was a benefit of that. And he was like, "What else do we need to do?" And so there was something called the Retreat in Minnesota. I was at Minnesota, and that's this place where you go and you learn the 12 steps for 30 days, and you kind of get ingrained into that system. And he's like, "Well, I can copy that." So we did that. In all of that time, I got to know Kevin really well, but I was prompted to go back to college, and I rolled the dice. I couldn't get back into journalism or radio without a degree. I called all my old friends, and they're like, "Yeah, you're a convicted felon. Maybe go to college, get a degree, come back, and we'll hire you." And what they were really telling me wasn't that I needed to get a degree per se. What they were saying is, get yourself together show us that you can accomplish something, and then we'll bring you back into the fold. And I understood that. And so that was my mission. But along the way, I had a professor who was teaching constitutional law. She heard my story and she's like, David, what a waste. um, you need to become a lawyer. And so my whole course of school changed and now is directed towards becoming a lawyer. And I would get to law school. I would pass the bar exam. I would get conditionally admitted to practice law in the state of South Dakota. The button on that story is um, the judge who sentenced me in September of 2005. 8 years later, she swore me in as a lawyer in the state of South Dakota. And so, but in all of that, we were talking earlier about it being just a bunch of guesswork and having to do it on our own. This is 2005 through 2012. I was making it up as I was going. I was very fortunate to have met really wonderful people that were very well connected. And that wasn't something I had before. And in all of that, I returned to connecting with Kevin, and he had started something called Face It Together. And I was part of the early group in Sioux Falls, getting that going in 2007, 2008. So I was familiar with Face It Together, but in 2012, it had kind of morphed now, was doing telephone recovery support and some very light recovery support. It was mostly a navigational resource. And so I reconnected with Kevin and he's like, come join us. We have communities that want this. We need help. We want to franchise it. Whatever, come work with us. And so in 2012, that's what I did. And it just turned out that there were three problems that we had to solve. One was there was really no system in place for recovery support. It was just a bunch of writing from William White, which was great, but not any plan of how to operationalize that. Right? What Connect is doing today and a lot of other places are doing, they're operationalizing a lot of those things, but it took a bunch of other organizations to kind of figure that out. And there was no certification for peers. None of that existed. So we had to build a training program. Yeah, there was Recovery Coaching Academy and CCAR and all of that. But what CCAR didn't do is CCAR didn't train to our method. They kind of just did the beginning, the foundation. This is what peer support is. This is where recovery. But we needed to train coaches for our method. That was different. And then the last thing was we weren't digital. All of our data was on paper and in spreadsheets, and we couldn't really tell a story. And so we really wanted to work with the two health systems in town. And the CEO of one of them said, if you want to work with us, you need data. And so that just happened to fall to me. I was the technology guy. And so out of that came this thing called the Recovery Capital Index, which is a variation on that recovery capital theme. And we had to validate that. And so that's kind of a longish story of, my own experience sitting in a courtroom with a judge telling me I had all these resources, but why weren't they ever connected? And she even said it. She goes, how did we fail you? And she kind of took that burden off to say, you had all this stuff, but nobody was helping you figure out how to put the pieces together. And you ended up here. Okay, now what do we do? And even from there, it was still just like a jumbled jigsaw puzzle. And so technology and the Recovery Capital Index in particular was to try to take that jigsaw puzzle, one, color the pieces, organize them a little bit, and say to Charles, look, here are 26 areas of your life. We've now broken them down. You've done the inventory. You answered the questions. Here it is scored for you. Now you're going to work with this peer, and we're going to navigate the path forward. And so that's sort of what's all behind kind of what we do now, which it takes on a little bit more sophistication, but that's kind of the origin story.
Yeah, I love that. And it goes so, well, just hand in hand with the peer model and peer approach. And, I'm curious, in particular with the AI recovery support, where do you see the future of all of that heading? I think that's could be fascinating in the future.
Well, yeah, this is what I find really, really intriguing. Having worked in peer support for a long time, there's a lot of information. And so let me throw a question back at you. When you're
Yeah.
working with somebody and you're talking to them for 45 minutes, like how do you process all of that? How do you how do you take that plus maybe other inputs, and
Hmm.
how do you manage that into something that's manageable or meaningful?
Typically, what I'll personally do if I'm on a call, I'll be taking notes during the call, and then I have kind of a little, map sort of thing that I'll
Mm-hmm.
do to point to a resource or to point to a certain group or, you know, a, whatever that resource might be. But I kind of try to map it out in that way so that during the conversation, I can already start to sort of lead in a certain
Yeah.
direction based on, different pillars of life that I know they want to improve
Yeah, and
upon.
you're doing that kind of in real time and
Hmm.
manual processes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is what we like to call heavy cognitive load. and
Sure.
and so let's say you do three or four. This is what I find really intriguing about how AI can help humans. Is we had a rule when I was running peer coaching was that you could only do 5 sessions a day, and sessions were 45 minutes. You could only do 5 a day. Why? Because at about that point, you become useless. You are
Mm.
compassionately fatigued, emotionally drained, and there are other parts of the business that need your support. So we needed to spread your talent. You can't just sit in a room and talk to people. That's not, there's more to it than that. And so we had this rule, and we wanted to keep the brain alive, if you will. And so now imagine, let's just say that so much of that was like taking notes afterwards, like what you're talking about. So I just had a really tough session. Now I have to relive it and write some notes. And so now I get into the next one and I'm still behind, right? As that peer support. Even counselors really struggle with this. Doctors struggle with this. Well, AI can flip that on its head, right? So if I'm getting a bunch of questions and answers from you in a structured survey, plus I've got maybe our conversation being recorded, all those notes can be taken for me. And if I can mental map that in technology to other resources. So maybe it was, you weren't paying attention to me, but I made a comment that I have a job interview coming up and I don't think I have the right clothes for that interview. Maybe you just weren't paying attention. Happens all the time. But it's really important to make sure I look the part when I go in. Well, maybe that
Mm.
gets surfaced as an action item because the AI recognized it.
Mm. I love
And that's
that.
where I think the
Yeah.
human might miss
Mm.
things, but the technology might not.
Absolutely. And, I think that opens a lot of doors as well, right? Like, once the AI recognizes an action item like you're talking about, what's the next step
Right.
there, right? Does that lead to some type of resource database? Point them in a good direction? Does that lead to, it just seems to me that the, opportunities there are endless. And I think at the end of the day, being patient focused, I think that's just going to make their life easier. It's going to do better for our
Yeah. And
community as a
I
whole.
think, because things just take time. People do need, you mentioned this earlier, kind of like this roadmap, this idea of a roadmap. And I think part of the reason why a lot of people struggle in treatment, struggle in the recovery process, and you've probably heard this before, the whole next couple of steps forward are so uncertain, so unknown. And like nobody can really paint it. Like you and I can kind of give our story and say, well, this is what we did along the way, but people can't see that for themselves. It's really
Mm.
hard, and their brain does other things to fill in the gaps, but it's not quite right. And so, imagine if I sat down, Charles, and you said, David, we're going to talk for an hour today, but for the first 15 minutes, I'd like for you to just complete a couple of questionnaires for me. This is just going to give me a bunch of information that we're just never going to get to in conversation, but it's going to help me. And I fill that out. And then we take the conversation plus all the other inputs. And because you've got sort of key areas, let's just use SMART goals as an example. Say we use SMART goals as our planning process. We could take all that information and we can use generative AI to move that into smart goals. And this is what we're kind of prototyping now, is we take data from Recovery Capital, we take data from anxiety surveys and demographics information and a bunch of other inputs. And then we say, generate for us 4 SMART goals based on that input. And so we've got one that's,
Hmm.
specific, measurable, attainable, et cetera. And then you, along with me as the client, can look at that goal that's been generated by the robot and go, I don't think that's quite right. How about we edit
Hmm.
this a little bit? But what we didn't have to do was, you and I didn't have to spend the cognitive time trying to define that. We
Right.
get to refine it and make it better for us. So that's where I really am excited, because now I can see the map. Now it's in front of me, and technology can track
Right.
that. And we can say, okay, did David attain goal 1? No. And we could check that every week. And if we keep saying no, and the technology could say, why no? What's going on?
I love that. And, I think that that opens up a lot of different possibilities for, we were talking about proactive
Yeah.
care. I think that opens a lot of opportunities there as well. I could imagine even someone just, kind of wondering about treatment, wondering if they have a problem, this and that, and using a tool like that to determine, oh wow, yeah, I'm actually minimizing so much right now. Oh yeah, the building is actually on fire, even though I don't feel it. I feel like it could really help to sort of minimize the overall damage and wreckage that this disease can cause.
Yeah, I mean, you probably know this. So the stat, I think this stat is still good. Um, someone can someone can at me if it's wrong, but for a long time, the going number was that 75% of people who overcome drug and alcohol addiction never go to treatment. They never go to any
Hmm.
resource whatsoever. They typically wake up. There's some external pressure, or maybe it's internal. Right? It could just be their own desire. But 9 times out of 10, it's because of a friend, a family member, a coworker, significant other. It's usually a person that's given them an ultimatum. And then they just go and figure it out. And they never walk into a traditional facility, right?
Hmm.
But why? What's going on there? What is it that they're piecing together? And I think that for some people, they end up going to treatment, but don't really need like the full blast treatment. But because they walked into a particular door, that's the treatment that they get. It's kind of the dirty laundry of the industry, right? We refer to ourselves,
Right.
and we need to fix that. But I like your point, Charles. I think if someone had a method where they could sort of put in some inputs and say, gosh, this is what I'm experiencing. This is where I'd like to go. Help me get there. Yeah, a lot of people might be able to do that all on their own. And they might even be willing to pay for something like that, or not. It could be a free service. I don't know. Someone will figure that out. But yeah, and now we've moved people out of the way. All right, we've triaged the road, and we've cleared it for those that are the higher risk, higher need, ones that need a lot more attention from the first responders and the care people.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I definitely look forward to the future and what all these tools can, provide for our community. And, actually, I want to ask my viewers right now, what would be important to you in a future AI type tool like we're talking about, right? What's a struggle right now that you're facing that you feel might be alleviated through this? And, please comment. Be very curious to hear and maybe even continue this conversation with some of the feedback that you guys provide. So, um, well, David, very interesting. Thank you so much for your time. And do you have any parting thoughts
Well,
the
one, I love that
viewers?
question that you're asking. Two, thanks for these questions, because I really do think that the more that peer support is leading the way in how we think about, I'll use the word care, but care and support, I think will show the people that have been in the system longer and have been a bit jaded by things or cynical by things, that there can be a new and fresh approach. And so, the only other thing I would add to that is, as you're thinking about this, if you work in peer support, if you're working in recovery support, get really mindful about what success is for you. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
detailed. It
Mm.
doesn't have to be overly complex, but if success for the support that you provide is to help people find abstinence, just as an example, and that is your success metric, then measure that and measure it rigorously. So every week you have a session, every 2 weeks you have a session, or whatever it is. Hey, Charles, are you still abstinent? No. Okay, fine. But check. We're just going to, it's like atomic habits. We fill in the box or we don't. Right. And, how many
Mm.
of those boxes in the 30 days are filled in or not? And, and what is that going to tell you over time? It's going to start to give you identity of what works and what doesn't, and you will adjust. You'll naturally adjust. So that's just my last little bit is find a thing that be very clear on what success is for what you do, and that will
Mm.
help you be much better at what you do and allow you to help more people.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much. What an interesting question. And if any of the viewers have any thoughts on that as well, please comment, because I think that that's sort of, the core of this really, is it's not just a one shoe fits all, one
Yep.
size fits all, it's very much multiple pathways. It's very much customized to each person. And I think that the more that we can approach it in that way, the better.
Yeah, and if I can just
Absolutely.
real quick add to that, I think a lot of people are looking for clear expectation. So, you know, if I walk into a facility and they say, this is what we do, we are faith based and 12 step. Awesome. Now I know, because that's what they do, and they're probably got really good at that. But that might not be right for me. And now the question is, how do I
Mm.
get to somewhere else that's more appropriate for me? Right. So if you're
Mm.
LGBTQ focused, go all in on it and just be it and be
Mm-hmm.
really good at it, because people need that. But if you're faith based, be faith based and be really good at it, and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with saying, that's not what we do. We don't do LGBTQ, but I know somebody in the community and I'm going to refer you to them, and vice versa. I think that will help so many more
Mm.
people find their way if we can be very clear on, this is what I do. And that's still multiple pathways, but it's clear expectation of what the pathway is.
Yeah. Absolutely, it is. Yeah, and I just want to add on to that real quick. It's interesting. I fully, fully agree that it's about finding the right kind of treatment. Not everybody is going to relate to a faith-based 12-step, right? Not everyone is going to relate to a wilderness
Mm-hmm.
retreat kind of environment. I think the important part, because I've heard people in the past, some of my clients and whatnot, talk about, oh, they've been to 7 treatment centers, treatment just doesn't work for them, this and that. I think the question there isn't how many treatment centers have you been to, but how are you taking the information you've learned within that treatment center and applying it to daily life, to triggering moments when we can't
Mm-hmm.
think logically. I think that's the question. That's the hard
Yeah,
part,
that
I think.
first year, I never really appreciated this much, but I am relatively intellectual, but I didn't appreciate what a lot of treatment is designed to do. And it's designed to help you understand how your brain works. And I think most people aren't really told that, right? They're not told that we're doing this cognitive behavioral therapy because it works like this. What we want you to be able to do is walk out of these doors and to know, oh, I'm feeling this way. And therefore, because I feel that way, I might act this way. And if I
Mm.
act that way, then I'm going to start thinking this way. And it's a revolving door, right? And so, how do you short circuit that? And like, we need to get people sort of trained more in a mental fitness approach around, oh, that's why I do that. Yeah, okay, there might be a disease there. That's fine. But, oh, I do that and then this happens. I do that and this happens. I do that.
Mm.
It's Pavlov. And how do you reverse engineer that? And it really is. And this is why I like coaches and peer support is ultimately, I believe we can be the ones, I say we can be the ones that are doing that sort of retrain on here's the difference between dependence and addiction. I have a coffee dependence that's different, kind of thing. Never going to really be addicted to caffeine, but I am definitely dependent upon it. I get a headache when I don't use it. Okay, but I'm not going to make any stupid things where I'm going to go drive drunk. But whenever I
Right.
drink, that's typically what happens. So maybe I shouldn't drink. Okay, how do we fix that problem? What do we have to do? And a lot of that, I think it's just equations. It's just multiple. And my favorite quote is everything in life is an equation. Work the equation. But we have to lay that
Hmm.
equation out for people and go, okay, what's your equation, Charles? What's the formula for
Hmm.
you?
Right.
What do you want to do and be? And then we got to reverse engineer. So it is a very logical, but it can also be very heartfelt. And I think peers do that
Absolutely.
really well, where they could be both on both sides of it, and then they can use their experience and then all those. So yeah, we kind of went way beyond sort of wrapping it up, but you dug into some meat there. So I love this conversation. I'm really excited
Good.
about these topics. This is what drives me every day.
Yeah. Same here. And hey, maybe we'll have to have another conversation with some feedback from the community and that kind of thing, because I think we've touched on a lot of interesting things here that we could absolutely develop into um, other conversations too
Yeah,
in the
love what
future.
you
So,
do. Keep up the great work, and yeah, happy to keep talking.
yeah, thank you. You as well.